So thank you. So unless you have anything particular to say, Charlotte, we'll kick off for the afternoon. We're now back in session and we're going to look at site SA28, land south of the old police house, Birch Grove Road, Horsted Canes. And if we look at what people have said, the council is saying it's got safe and secure access, there are no showstoppers. It has the potential to form a natural extension to the village. The impact on the AONB could be minimal. It's in a sustainable location. Andrew Black states that an appeal on this site was dismissed due to substantial concerns from the inspector on the adverse impact on the AONB. And if you look at that appeal statement or appeal decision, paragraph 36, second half of, says, I consider the general sensitivity of the landscape to be high, the proposed magnitude of change to be major, and the effect upon landscape character to be major adverse. He also reminds me of the responsibility in section 85 of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. I noticed that Mr. Michael Brown beat me to it on that one this morning. He states in paragraph 40 that the council considers the appeal scheme to be major development. And then in 41, he says basic considerations, nature, scale, balance, etc., do not on balance lead me on those terms to regard the appeal site as major development. This is a scheme for what, 30, 35, 32 in this appeal, 32 new dwellings. We're now up to, we're down to 25 dwellings, interestingly enough. And that the scheme would conflict with objective S2 of the management plan, which seeks to protect the historic pattern and character of settlement. So that's just in support of what Andrew Black has brought to my attention. Stratton Parker for Sunley Estates Limited state that the county council confirms that there's safe access to be achieved, still supported by, at that time, by Horsted Canes and the neighbourhood plan. He again regards it as a, well, they regard it as a natural extension to the village of Horsted Canes and offering an appropriate transition to the wider high-wheeled AONB. So one of my colleagues has basically dismissed an appeal based on the impact on the AONB. The council consider that in fact it is possible and environmentally acceptable and could in fact be a natural extension to the village. Is there anything else the council wish to add?
And I don't know, maybe there's an ambiguity in the way that Mr. Black has expressed himself, but the appeal decision to which he relates is not an appeal in relation to this particular site. It is to land which adjoins this site, and the particular comments that he's quoted in his representations from the inspector relate to that site. What he doesn't record is that the inspector also made certain comments about the allocation SA28, which are rather more favourable. And so I don't have that at my fingertips, and I'm not sure whether you have the decision letter there. You were obviously quoting from something a moment ago.
I do actually have it. Yeah, I do.
For Hollingham, who's got the relevant paragraph in front of her, and she can steer you to that. So I think it's very important that you see what the inspector said about SA28. So if I can ask Jennifer Hollingham to turn her camera on and guide you to where you need to go.
So we're looking at the Birch Grove Road appeal decision, which was the 10th of May this year, so about a month ago. Paragraph 58 of that appeal decision does discuss the appeal site and the draft allocation SA28 that we're discussing now. And there's a sentence within that paragraph that says
I'm sorry, Jennifer, can you take me back to the paragraph again?
Paragraph 58 of the Birch Grove Road appeal decision.
58.
And that's a paragraph includes within it a sentence which says, by virtue of its location on the village side of the junction of Birch Grove Road and Danehill Lane, any development of SA28 is likely to have a far stronger and more integral visual and functional relationship to the existing built form of the settlement. And that's when comparing it to the appeal site. But I think that shows that the inspector has considered the effects of SA28.
And more importantly, so doesn't regard them as being of the same level as the concerns that he had about the site that he was looking at.
Thank you.
By way of introduction, sir, I think otherwise you've summarised our position on this quite well.
So, Andrew Black, would you like to come in then?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm quite aware that that site is different to this site, the site allocation. My matter statement does say that quite clearly, that site, and it doesn't actually even adjoin this site. It is removed by the road. It's effectively the other side of the road at that point. But just to say, in terms of the comparisons to this site and the appeal, that paragraph 58, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but that paragraph 58 is in the section that deals with the impact on the conservation area. And my real points were regarding the AOMB, and I don't think that in the appeal decision there's any difference made in terms of the AOMB impacts. So that was just my point, and I hope it's helpful. Thank you.
So the site that the appeal is referring to, is that to the northeast of the appeal site, further away from the village?
Yeah, effectively, what you have is you have Birch Grove Road. So
Yeah.
this site is at the rear of the old police house. As you travel kind of northeast along Birch Grove Road, you pass a road called Danehill. And the appeal site, as I understand it, the council will confirm this, was the other side of Danehill. So it's kind of directly to the northeast of this site, separated slightly by the road itself.
Thank you. That's helpful. That's great. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you wanted to say on this, Mr. Black, or was that your contribution?
You have the points in our reps, sir. So that's.
I have, yes. Right, Helena Griffiths, good afternoon to you. Are you here?
Sir. Hello. I made the mistake of the last week not actually introducing myself, so let me introduce myself for the gathered crowd today. I'm actually a resident of Horsted Canes, born and bred. I'm also a landowner of Site 68, just to be totally transparent on that. That's Sheila Site 68. But I'm actually making representations today as a resident of Horsted Canes, as unfortunately the Horsted Canes Parish Council are unable to partake in the discussions. I'd just like to make three very brief comments about the SA28 site. My first comment is about the neighbourhood plan. I think both Mid Sussex and the developers suddenly make comments about the stages that the neighbourhood plan is at. It's been made in my representations. I think that was MIQ 1.2 subset 5. Yeah, the district council described the neighbourhood plan as being paused, and Sunley themselves actually described that Holsted Keynes Parish Council still seek to support SA 28. As per my statements regarding the neighbourhood plan, the Parish Council have withdrawn support for all allocations in Holsted Keynes. The neighbourhood plan at Regulation 14, the responses were that the community did not support deferring allocations to Mid Sussex. So the comments that were made, I think Sunley have picked up on the fact that Holsted Keynes neighbourhood plan supports the SADPD, and in particular SA 28. But yeah, so unfortunately, actually, the Parish Council have withdrawn support for that, for the SADPD allocations. They are in the process themselves of, they've made a steering group, and they are actually currently assessing sites again, just to highlight that. My second point is just to express slight concern over the desire for the applicant, or not the applicant, but the site promoter, to want to change the wording on the number of houses. The density itself for a site within the AONB is at the minute at 20.3 DPHA. And I actually believe that that is possibly still a little bit too high density for this site. Currently, on the other site, SA 29, there have been comments made about requirements in the high wheeled AONB management plan, and some of their recommendations include a surface SUD system. I can see from the heritage report that was included in the documentation by Sunley that actually they're not including that as a way of discharging surface runoff. So that's one of the things that sort of suggests to me that if they don't feel that they've got the space to accommodate that, which would increase their biodiversity, stick with recommendations from the AONB, then I actually feel that possibly the site is still slightly overdeveloped. Finally, I have a comment just on the oak tree that's actually on the road. I do note that the visibility displays move the road right adjacent to the butt of that oak tree. I understand from their comments that they do want to retain that, but I'd like to have a little bit more information on how they want to protect that, given that they're actually moving the road even closer to the butt. It's within about 2 feet of the butt right now. And when you look at their access plan, it takes it right adjacent to the trunk of the tree. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much. Any more hands up? Anybody else who wants to speak? And then I'll bring the council in. Right, whether it's you, Mr. Brown, or back to Jennifer. You? Can I ask you about the density figures and whether you feel they're too high, and whether an proposed access will be too harmful to the oak tree?
So I can come back on, first of all, on the neighbourhood plan point, if that's helpful, that Ms. Griffiths has just raised. Just a bit of clarification on that. Just the history of this, an original iteration of a Regulation 14, Holsted Keynes Parish Council's produced neighbourhood plan, actually included as proposed allocations SA 28 and 29, at the same time as the District Council were preparing their sites DPD. The decision was taken between both parties, really, that rather than have a duplicate set of allocations, because the neighbourhood plan fell behind on its timescale and the site allocations DPD was moving on ahead, but the sites DPD would include those sites. There would be no need for us to double allocate, as it were, with the neighbourhood plan. So in the fullness of time, those sites fell away in Holsted Keynes neighbourhood plan, and they offered their support to Mid Sussex, essentially meeting remaining housing need at Horsted Canes as identified DP4, DP6 within the site's DPD. My knowledge of the situation recently is that following a revised Reg 14 consultation, the parish council are taking some time to consider the comments that were made during that Regulation 14 consultation, and have started work, as Mr. Griffith says, with a revised steering group on that site to look at other options for potential sites within Horsted Canes. But I think, just to be clear, obviously because of the fullness of time with the DPD, that those at the present time will be in addition to the sites that we've got in the sites DPD, should they be found sound, not as an alternative to those. So I think that the withdrawal of the support for the sites in the neighbourhood plan isn't really relevant to the fact that we're still making our sites DPD, meeting the need that's identified in DP4 and DP6, and we feel these are the best sites to do that.
Thank you. What's your comment on the density point, that in fact it's too low, Mr. Marsh?
Yeah. So if I can start, and then I'll go back to either Mr. Marsh or Ms. Hollingham as we need to. I think the primary thrust of Lady Griffith's comment was directed at the representation you've had from Sunley, the site promoter, who is asking to increase the overall allocation from 25 to, I think they've asked for up to 30 units. And so that's what Sunley are asking. That's not supported by the council. The plan says 25, and we believe 25 is appropriate. But at of the order of 20 DPH, that's a perfectly reasonable density for a site of this kind. There are no, I mean, it is in the AONB, one needs to be sensitive to that, but beyond that, there are no particular site constraints here which require a lower density. So, I mean, we hear what's said, but we don't see any reason why I can't support up to 25 dwellings.
And presumably the access to the site, just remind me, are we going to the east onto Birch Grove Road?
Yeah.
So I think this is one for Ms. Hollingham, but we're just having a quick discussion with it. I mean, about who's best placed to deal with this. It's certainly not me.
So the site's access will be from Birch Grove Road, which is to the north of the site, and that's in policy wording. The policy wording goes on to say, ensuring sufficient visibility displays are provided with a junction with Danehill Lane, which is to the east of the site. With regards to the oak tree, the site promoter in their hearing statement at paragraph 2.5, they say that detailed access and visibility display drawings have been prepared, and those are within the examination library on our website, and they identify the suitable point of access from the site onto Birch Grove Road. Those have been verified through discussions with West Sussex County Council Highways, and they go on to say that these studies confirm that safe access can be achieved within the site, and the existing oak tree along the frontage can be retained. Paragraph 2.5 of the site promoters hearing statement, which is reference 779.
So if Elena Griffiths is really saying it's within the root protection area of the tree, is that not right?
It may well be, sir, and indeed, certainly if those drawings or anything to go by, I understand it probably would be. But there are perfectly well established techniques in terms of no dig and other things for overcoming those sorts of issues. I mean, I don't know whether Ms. Hollingham wants to add anything, or Mr. Marsh. Yeah, I don't think we can take it any further than that, sir.
I think, again, it would be useful to have a note on that, so I'm reassured that that tree will stay.
Certainly, so we can do that.
Right, I can't see anybody else who wants to speak unless my machine's out of order. So if that's...
Could I pop back in, please, sir?
You can.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
It would be good to have clarification from an arboriculturist as to whether that tree is classed as a mature tree or not. Because obviously extending the road across the RPAs is not recommended for, what's the classification? Is it an ancient tree? Yeah, it's the bole of the tree is quite large. You cannot get your arms around it in any way. It probably takes 2 or 3 people to get your arms around it. So I can assume it's actually quite an old tree. I am appreciative that Sunley believe they can retain it, but I would sort of emphasize that it's not necessarily just the retention, it's the protection of that tree. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I mean, as ever, when I ask for a statement or a note, I will give other parties a week in which to comment. So you'll have a chance if you feel your comments are not being taken on board on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
But if we can move on to the next one, which is SA 29. So by the church, which is no longer practicing as a working church, from what I can gather. And the comments here is for 30 dwellings in the local plan. The council again say they've got safe and secure access from Hamsland. There's no conflict with national policy. No significant infrastructure considerations were identified. It's in flood zone 1. No showstoppers. No significant impacts on living conditions or the quality of the landscape. Again, the council admit or accept that the site is within the AONB, but they say of low impact, not regarded as major development in the context of MPPF 172. It's also, according to the council statement, in a sustainable location within the village. Paul Fairweather states that safe and secure access can only be provided by action that's not within the ownership of the site. So we've got a question here about whether more land is needed and what the implications of that might be. Also, Paul Fairweather talks about poor sight lines, impacts on roots of important trees, and again, impact on the AONB. The Hamsland Action Group state that access to the site via Hamsland fails what they term the safe access requirement. And they say that in the absence of credible evidence, the proposed development can deliver safe and suitable access to the site along Hamsland, the developers should not be granted planning permission. And Andrew Black draws my attention to the fact it's within the brick clay brackets wheeled mineral safeguarding area. Again, anything from the council initially on this one?
Yeah. Sorry, sir. I don't think so at this stage, sir. And I note, I think Ryden are here at the moment. There may be some detailed issues on which it would be sensible, once we've heard what objectors have to say, it might be sensible if they respond to some of the points of detail, and if there's any sweeping up to do at the end of that, then I'll come in at that point.
Well, I wonder if Terry Hyam or Paul Fairweather or both of you would like to say anything at this point. If you're saying anything, you must be muted. Because I'm not hearing anything.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Mr. Hyam. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My picture's not coming up, but yeah.
Oh, I've got you now.
Okay, sorry about that.
Right, we've got you.
Yeah.
I've got your ceiling as well. Good view of your ceiling at the moment. Oh, I got you. Right, do carry on.
Yeah, well, we said in the introduction to our submission to the hearing that there were three sort of what we regarded as showstoppers for this site. One of them was the access from Lewis Road to the site, which has not been dealt with by Ryden's transport report at all, on the basis that the road curves. It has a lot of single track operation because of parking on the north side. And with large construction vehicles going backwards and forwards from the site, unable to view each other from either end of this western section of Hamsland, you have a recipe for chaos. This was in fact highlighted by three reports submitted to the planning application site. One by a very experienced civil engineer, whose report is included in our submission. The other was by Helena Griffiths, who you've heard from before, and the third was by by a consultant commissioned by Hamsland Action Group. Excuse my froggy throat. So the access from Lewis Road, we contend, is not a safe access to the site itself from Lewis Road. Getting to the actual access onto the site from Hamsland and from the site onto Hamsland, there are major problems because some vegetation which cannot be removed, which is not within the site and which is not within highways land, obstructs the visibility displays and means that the bell mouth arrangement cannot be implemented, not with that width of road. So you'd have to have a much narrower road to allow the bell mouth exit. This has been recently reviewed by the author of the what is Appendix 3A in our submission from Paul Fairbairn, which is which we have reproduced in full as far as his access from Lewis Road is concerned. He has now done an extra report on this access from Hamsland onto the site. And he concludes that the site as planned is not deliverable. The other area, which I think Paul Fairweather will be better suited to deal with, and indeed he could have dealt with this one as well, with the trees lining the route onto the site. So if he is prepared to step up.
Right, Mr. Fairweather, Paul Fairweather, do you take part?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you, sir. Just to briefly explain to people who are not aware, this site is very unusual in that the access to it there is only one access. The access is about 7 meters wide maximum for about a 25-meter long strip onto the actual enlarging site itself where the buildings would be sited. The reason for looking at it this way was brought about by a recent planning application that's been put in, the drawings to which have brought up a number of issues, and it's those to which we refer, but we are talking obviously about the site, not the application itself. The problem being that you mentioned earlier on, the site can't be delivered without going beyond the site boundaries. It involves that tiny strip of land entering the site and where it joins the highway. I am the neighbour, the next door neighbour to that strip of land, and the drawings put in by the developer seek to cut across the corner of the property which is outside the site boundary. The developer themselves sought to do it when sorry, let me put it another way, I went back to the developer and said that this is a problem, and they came back to me and said, well, okay, in that case, it's highways land. And we have arrangements with highways when we can deal with it. I checked on this with highways, and they've confirmed that their land ends with the edge of the tarmac footpath, the pavement, which is not on the site itself. So the corner of the actual area itself remains a problem. Until that's resolved, obviously, I think the access to the site is going to be too restricted to get the splays that were referred to by my colleague, and also to get the visibility lines that he referred to. So that's the major issue as far as that's concerned. In order to achieve that bell mouth, what was proposed by this developer is to actually remove 2 trees, which they are claiming are dying, which in fact are very vigorous, and I have to cut back on a regular basis to stop it encroaching on the footpath. The second issue is regarding the line of trees which borders that access land, that 25 metres or so of land. The whole of the access to the site, both in construction terms and later on in occupancy, has got to pass along that strip. And it is bordered by a line of trees, 8 trees, a mature oak and several hornbeams, about 15 metres high. They successfully at the moment screen the site, which is one of the issues brought up by the AONB assessment, that the site is well screened. Therefore, it follows that any damage to those trees, long-term or short-term, is going to expose the site and will do for a long time. This applicant has actually done some tree work to try and assess the state of those trees. But to a large extent, that's not particularly relevant in our view, because all the main services that have got to go to this site have got to be laid in trenches, and those trenches have got to be within those 7-metre wide strip. The root protection areas of all those trees extends considerably beyond that, according to the relevant BS. Therefore, the current applicant has not been able to show in any way how they're going to bring main services onto the site, and their outline planning application doesn't even mention it. The question of damage and to those trees anyway, in principle, is wrong, and certainly to damage them by laying a roadway the complete strip is going to be the only issue here. Putting a no-dig roadway in, apparently, according to the BS, should not cut across more than 20% of the root plate areas. And in the case we're talking about here, it's anything above 35%, and even in some cases, nearly 100%. So the threat to those trees is considerable. As again, just to paraphrase, the whole thing revolves around this very small strip of land, which is the only access to the site. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. So was that 2 points you made? I thought, or is your third point included there as well?
I'm sorry, say again.
I thought you were going to give me 3 points, and I've made a note of the fact it's unusual, the access is too restricted, and your second point about the trees.
Indeed.
Is there a third point?
Generally speaking, no, it's covered within the points.
2 points, right? That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you very much.
Not at all. Right. Have I got Ryden's representative here? I thought I had.
So yes, Chris Huff from Sigma.
Of course, yes, Chris.
Am I out of sync, word and visual? Is it distracting? Would I be better just being sound? Because I think we've got a problem with the syncing of the sound and the visual.
Okay, well, let's just have you on.
Take my pretty face away.
Sound, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's fine while Mr. Huff is talking. Problem arises not talking because he's got his. When Mr. Huff who's talking, it's fine. When he's not talking, turn his microphone.
Okay, well, I've taken, can you hear me, sir?
I can. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Right, excellent. Well, let's leave it at that at the moment. I've got a slight delay before I hear what you say. I can see you say it, and then I count to about 3 and you arrive. So as long as you're aware of that, we can't do anything about it, so we just have to live with it, I'm afraid. So the important point here is that there is a planning application in for 30 units from my clients, Ryden Homes. The reference is DM/20/4692. Now, details of that application again have been put in the examination library. It's available to you and to everyone else to look at and dip into to the extent that you wish. The points that are being raised by the objectors here today are ones which have been raised by them extensively in connection with the consultation responses to the planning applications. Planning application, and are being addressed and have been addressed substantially by the expert consultant team that are advising Ryden on it. These proceedings are high level. It depends how much detail you feel you need to go into. And I suppose what I would suggest is that I will deal with the issues as they've been put forward by Mr. Hyam, Mr. Fairweather, and possibly Ms. Griffiths when she comes to say something. If you feel you want to go into more detail and see the detailed expert opinion, then perhaps we'll submit a note or something like that. So I just put that idea forward for you if that's the case. Generally, though, they are not points which are appropriate to an allocation. They're appropriate to a planning application. They're dealt with in detail by technical reports, and I'm happy to submit those technical reports, but I think all parties will have seen most of them, although some information I think was submitted yesterday which is relevant to this. Just dealing with the points then, so certainly starting off with Mr. Hyam, the access from Lewis Road, that was not something that Ryden's highway consultant considered was a severe highway impact that would affect the decision on a planning application. We've also had the consultation response from the County Council, and they don't see it as a severe impact. So it's a matter which is between professionals, and as in many planning applications, the committee will have to make a decision on that point in due course. We certainly don't see it as a problem. The access site itself, there are some factual mistakes there. There isn't vegetation within the site vision displays that detracts, although there are 2 trees that are being taken out. Those are not exceptional trees, sorry. I'm just taking instructions, but they're within the bell mouth. Yes. Yeah. So to create the bell mouth and visibility displays, 2 trees do have to be removed. Technically, within the visibility displays themselves, beyond the bell mouth, there is no vegetation. The bell mouth and the visibility displays are entirely within land that is controlled by the landowner who Ryden hold an option from, and the highway authority. So there is no land which would be intervening and would be third-party land. A planning consent for the red line application that is now submitted, were planning consent granted for that, it would be implementable and deliverable with no problem, no need to acquire any additional land. I think that deals with Mr. Fairweather's point on that as well. It probably wasn't clear from what Mr. Fairweather was saying, but there are, if you like, 3 areas of trees that we're talking about. The 2 that will be removed from the to form the bell mouth, which are, as I say, are not significant. They have been assessed, and their loss is not significant, certainly to the AONB, and they're not important trees. Again, we can provide you with arboricultural assessments to that effect. There is a fine oak tree just inside the access. That, in fact, we can create the bell mouths without any problem to that tree. So that was established fairly on by very careful investigation that will not be affected. The access can be formed by that. There's then a third area, which in fact isn't trees. It's an overgrown hornbeam hedge, which runs alongside the boundary between Mr. Fairweather's property and the site. That, in the light of concerns about that remaining, because it does have a screening effect and it does have some relevance to the AONB screening, has been very carefully assessed. We've had hand-dug trial trenches all the way down to establish very clearly what the root pattern is. And that has shown that with a method statement which has been submitted, prepared by our arboriculturalist, that a road can be constructed using pile, using special methods of construction, but accepted within the standard guidance on arboricultural impact. That can be constructed, and so there is no doubt that hornbeam hedge can be retained and will be retained. And again, that information is submitted and is with the case officer as we speak. It will be done by no-dig methods, as the trenches themselves were done, and it will be piles with supporting the road surface.
Using piles.
You know,
Using an overlay system.
we're using an overlay system, I'm told, rather than piles, but that's a technical detail. In terms of the services, so they will come in through the access. At the moment, again, we're talking about outline with a high degree of detail asked for and provided, but ultimately, in terms of the construction of the services, they will go on the far side of the access away from the trees, and they will either be mould underneath the root system, or if that is satisfactory, if arboricultural advice says that, they'll be put alongside the side away from the trees of the access. So basically, in summary, our position is that these are old issues. They have been raised. They have been treated very seriously and sensitively. We've looked into them in great detail with experts in the field, and we are confident that the scheme can go ahead. And in fact, if there were any showstoppers, Ryden wouldn't have been spending so much money on satisfying these points that have been raised by local objectors in connection with the application. So unless you've got any questions on that, so that's all I have in response at this point.
Just to summarise your comments on submitting a note, I would like it in the form of a non-technical summary. If you want to refer me to the technical reports in the library, that's fine. But just to basically address the points that have been put by Mr. Fairweather and by Mr. Hyam. So primarily access points and tree points, and I guess land ownership boundaries. just to the point you're making about who controls the bellway, for example. So that's what I need. If you can get that for me, and then other parties, as I say, Mr. Fairweather and Mr. Hyam, and anybody else for that matter, who wishes to comment on what you said, there'll be the usual 1 working week period for any of the comments to come back to me in response to what you say. But thank you for being fairly brief on that. Was there anybody else who wanted to speak on this? Well, thank you for. Were you raising your hand then? Well, thank you for Mr. Fairweather. Were you raising your hand then? Fairweather.
I am, yes. Just very briefly, sir, if I just may. The land on which the trees, the 2 trees, which are of minor importance, they propose to remove in order to create the access to this site. It's all very well claiming that it is within the site, and I claim that it isn't. Their drawings are not particularly accurate, and their drawings of highways land is not particularly accurate. So simple assertions that this is a fact are in fact wrong. So that will be challenged by me all the way down. I'm talking site here, not in terms of a particular planning application, but it just serves to illustrate the difficulties of delivering this site as a viable site for housing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Does the council wish to come back on any of these points, or are you prepared to receive this note, this non-technical summary, and then we can take it from there?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the fact you still seem to have another 3 hands up. I don't know
Can't see
whether
any hands on my screen at all.
I don't know whether those are old hands or new hands, but
Right.
I may come in at the end if I need to. But it seems to me, rather than constantly playing ping pong backwards and forwards, you've been kind enough to allow us nearly the last word on most occasions, and that's where I prefer to come in, if I may.
Right. Oh, I do notice that. I think Helena Griffiths, I think you have a hand up. Is that right, Helena?
Yes, sir, that's right.
Right, will you come in?
Fantastic. I was going to back up some points made by the other 2, but I'll briefly skip over them. I fully support what's been said about the safe and secure access within the ownership of the allocated site. I'd like to point you towards Mr. Fairbairn's representation to the planning application. I'm happy to forward that on to you if you'd like eyes on that. He's challenging this aspect of third-party ownership. So if you'd like eyes on that, please do let me know. As regards to your little Roman numeral 3, conflict with the made neighbourhood plan, obviously I've made comments about the Horsley Keynes neighbourhood plan and where it is, so I won't elaborate on those anymore, but just refer to my MIQ statement 1.2 section 5. With regards to the national planning policy, sir, I know there's been a lot of discussion as to whether this is a major development or not, and I've listened intently to the sort of Marici discussions on development and sort of 30 units being a rule of thumb. But actually what I think is more important is actually the density of the development. It's not the number of houses. You can have 30 houses on a very large plot, which would have a lot less impact on the landscape and the countryside versus 30 houses on quite a small plot. And I will elaborate at that in a later date, further in my discussion. I'd just like it to be noted that the current application on SA29 that's being discussed here is actually classed by Mid Sussex as a major development on their site notice, just to highlight that point. There's quite a lot of information in the NPPF on protecting the landscape and iterations like that, and having a safe access. I think those points have probably been raised by other people, and the intricacies of the NPPF paragraphs I won't go into here. But what I would like to just highlight is some numbers to go behind the comments that have been made by Paul Fairweather. So on your 3.3 section 5, is there any issues including vehicular access? So the transport statement that has been discussed by Mr. Huff actually at no point makes comment to the fact that the road in from Lewis Road is a single track road. That single track road accesses a cul-de-sac, which is called Challiners and Hamsland. That cul-de-sac contains 120 houses already. Adding another 30 houses would actually increase the capacity of that road by 25%. Just like it also noted that the 120 houses in Hamsland and Challiners is over a third of the population of Horsted Canes. So that is actually having quite a dramatic impact on a large proportion of the residents within the village. I've made comment in my Regulation 19 comments about the parking stress survey that was done. That can be seen in my attachment A from my Regulation 19 comments, so I won't go into detail of that as you've read those. But I do believe that the site is constrained due to traffic safety issues along that western portion of Hamsland. It may not really feature highly on the Mid-Sussex transport simulation, but it does actually feature highly on the day-to-day lives of the 120 houses and I don't know how many residents on a day-to-day basis. And as of yet, these comments have been made at Regulation 18 and Regulation 19, and no mitigation for that single track in and out has been proposed by the site developer. Going on to your little Roman numeral 6, is there any significant impact on the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers? I was listening intently to quite a few of the discussions that have been held, and I do note that if the houses in a site are directly overlooking a site, that could be classed as affecting the living conditions. If you note the layout of the houses on the site, the draft layout, you can actually see that none of the houses are at an oblique angle to the existing houses on that south side of Hamsland, which abut directly onto the site. And the garden space that's being provided there is actually pretty minimal. So I would claim that actually the site is being overlooked and it is affecting the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers. Moving on. Sorry.
I'm sorry, you got more points, go on.
Yeah, sorry, got more points. Section 7, small Roman numerals. Is there any significant impact on the quality of the landscape, the ecology of the site and the surrounding area? This to me is actually one of the biggest issues. As mentioned, the access to the site, if you follow BS 5837, it actually states in section 7.4.2.3, new permanent hard surfacing should not exceed 20% of any existing surfaced ground within the RPA. As Mr. Fairweather's mentioned, that is not achievable on a 7-metre wide strip where you have RPAs that are 9 metres in diameter. I've done some back of the envelope calculations and I reckon it is between 30 and 35% of the RPAs which are being affected by this. I understand the developer has said that they're going to be putting in a surface which is a no-dig surface and then building up the root surface. That is following BS 5837, but that is not following the recommendations to not exceed 20% of the RPA. The AONB actually, in their comments about this site and making it a low impact site, they said that in comments to me directly in a challenge when I was challenging their assessments of different sites in Horsted Canes, They actually said the removal of mature trees to access site 184, which is now SA 29, was not considered as part of the AONB assessment because this information was not available in the SHELAR. Although the trees are not being removed themselves, they are being substantially impacted by the access road going over the RPAs. Can I just also highlight that it's not only the access road which is going to be affecting these trees. To gain access down a 7-metre strip, they're actually proposing to lift the crowns of these trees. By lifting the crown to 6 or 7 metres on a tree that is 15 metres high, you're actually losing quite a substantial amount of that canopy. So these trees are not only under threat from the RPAs, they're also under threat from losing their tree canopy as well. These mature trees are actually visible from the minute you enter Hamsland. They're visible on the skyline. This tree line is one of the only mature tree lines as you enter that whole 1/3 area of the village. You can see it as you come along the single track western end of Hamsland. And I recommend if you would go and have a site visit, if you haven't already, sir, to note, to note the impact and the visual extent of that tree line. Yeah, we've already talked about the trenching, which I believe will probably also have extensive damage to the RPAs. The SA DPD actually suggests investigating opportunities to set the access away from these trees. Given that it's a 7-metre access, there is no other alternative bar buying third-party land. So this actually could relate back to the fact that if you don't believe that those trees can be truly protected, then the access is not available to this site, which goes back to your point about is access actually available within the site itself. In all, I sort of think the whole access itself is ill-fitting in the space and the conditions that prevail within the applicant's control. So not only are we talking the width of that access road, we're also talking the impact to dig the trenches and to also cut away the canopy of those trees. On ecology, just a note, just because a hornbeam has been overgrown, it actually makes it into a tree. It doesn't make it into a hedge. And again, sir, from your site visit, I hope you appreciate these are actually hornbeam trees, not just a hornbeam hedge. The applicants state that their allocation is supported by an LVIA, but the visual impact is not the only thing that a site should be assessed on for the AONB. There are multiple other elements to the AONB management plan that should also be considered in addition to visual impact. Now, I think this is going to be my last comment, but it's going to be a bit of a long, hopefully not too long. I hope you follow my logic.
Right, let me have your last comment then.
Yeah, so sites have been assessed on a site area versus density yield calculation, and many of the sites within the district plan have had numbers reduced due to the constraints. I actually think this probably hasn't happened with St Stephen's Field, SA 29. The proposed density of SA 29 is 26.5 dpha. The council will probably attest that this figure has been reached through a landscape-led assessment. I challenge that statement. Pragmatism suggests to me that if you're looking at densities in a category 1 settlement, you would have the highest densities. On the margin of a category 1 settlement, you would reduce the densities, and then you would start reducing the densities as you go down through those categories. Unfortunately, well, also you would reduce them further if you're trying to protect the AONB itself. Unfortunately, this logic cannot actually be followed when I try to work through the logic for SA 29. St Stephen's Field has the highest density of all the greenfield sites being allocated in the DPD. not just the AONB sites. I'm talking about all the greenfield sites in the DPD. This does not make any logical sense to me, who's trying to be pragmatic about site densities. In stark contrast to St Stephen's, SA15, which is described as a piece of scrubland right in the conurbation of Burgess Hill, has a density of 25 dph, very similar to that of a medieval field in the AONB. A second example, SA21 Fox Hill, which is directly adjacent to Howard's Heath built-up area boundary, not in the AONB, and their housing density is 19.22 dpha. Both of them are actually less than that of a medieval field system within the AONB. Other allocations within the AONB, which you think you would be able to compare them to, such as SA27 in Handcross that you've already had a look through. SA27 is a modern field system and has a density of 18.4 dpha. That's a modern field system, not a medieval field system, which is what the AONB is set up to protect. So SA29 is on the periphery of this category 3 settlement, Horsted Canes. It is a medieval field system, and the AONB stated as a partial field system. This does not still warrant sympathetic development and a suitable, this does not enable a sympathetic development and a suitable transition from that urban hard edge from the AONB medieval field system, which surround the site in itself as well. I believe that the capacity should be reduced to truly reflect its location in the AONB and better consideration of its setting on the edge of a category 3 settlement. Any appraisal?
Just stop me for a minute on that, Heather Griffiths. So are you arguing that the development should be a lower density and smaller development, or are you arguing that there should be a deletion of the site?
On two levels. If the access is available and achievable without damaging the tree belt, I would argue that the density should be reduced substantially. But if access is not available and achievable without affecting the tree belt, I feel the site should be deleted.
Just bear with me.
No problem.
Right, was that your final point?
I was just going to go on and say that the planning application actually proves why I feel it's over development of the site. The site is cramped. It creates overbearing of properties to the north. The houses themselves are not set back from the curtilage of neighbours, nor at an angle to reduce overlooking. There is no substantive transition to the countryside. There's a very hard urban edge, which is encroaching on existing hedgerows and boundaries. And those are medieval field systems themselves. Okay. There's very little space to mitigate the loss of biodiversity, and that should be a measurable gain in the biodiversity gain, not just a net gain. It should be a measurable gain. There's no ability for a site of this size with this density to actually have a sustainable above ground subsystem, which again is recommended by the AONB. So essentially, I just think there should be a substantive reduction in housing numbers on SA29, and that would go some way to reducing the impact on the AONB landscape. And actually,
I've got those points now. I think I've taken on board all you've said, and I'm going to pass them on to the council in case they've got any further response.
Yeah.
I would like a comment on the number of dwellings on the cul-de-sac and whether that's appropriate. That's the first point. I'd like a comment on the living conditions in relation to the densities. Second point. Third point would be impact on the landscape and how serious that is. So if the council would like to come back on those points, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. So while Mr. Marsh is marshalling his thoughts on your particular questions, can I just pick up one or two other things as well? First of all, Ms. Helena Griffiths referred to the fact that on the council's website, this is classified as major development. So you will appreciate that that is done for the purposes of the definition of major development one sees in the Development Management Procedure Order, which is 10 units or more. That is not, I know it's confusing for many people, but it's not the same as the test for major development in the AONB. And indeed, that's one of the things that's made very clear about the case law on the Marici opinions. So I understand why the confusion arises, but they are two quite different things. In terms of safety issues raised by Hammond's action group, so well, you've heard first of all what Mr. Huff has to say, but I can confirm that the application drawings have been looked at by the County Council from a highways aspect, in terms of safety, congestion, all those sorts of things. They are satisfied. I appreciate that there may be knock-on implications in terms of loss of trees, but in terms of the concern about the access itself in highways terms, the County Council is happy with it, and from local authority perspective, as far as we're concerned, that's more than enough to indicate this isn't a showstopper. The concerns that have been raised about the creation of the access, and there are two elements there. So first of all, the access road itself, and secondly, the provision of services. As Mr. Huff has indicated, there are well-established no-dig techniques. We're satisfied that those are usable in this case. We wait to see the note that Mr. Huff is going to produce, and it may well be so there's a further exchange at that stage. But at this point, we see no reason in principle why that isn't an answer. As to the provision of servicing, so firstly, as Mr. Huff's indicated, whether or not trenching is going to be a problem if the trench is placed at the edge of the site furthest away from the trees is a matter that will be revealed by further sort of survey work. But should it be, you heard Mr. Huff say that in those circumstances, it wouldn't be necessary to use trenching because it would be possible to put the services in using molding instead. So that would overcome that problem as far as we're concerned. In terms of the density issues, so I'm going to look to Mr. Marsh in a moment. I would say in overall terms, 30 or just under 30 dwellings per hectare is still, by most people's standards, a relatively low level of density. But I'm going to ask Mr. Marsh to take up the conversation from there, if you can, please.
Mr. Marsh, do come in.
Thank you. Just to note about a couple of points on density, I think. Just looking at the density on Challenders on the map, and by comparison, I think we would say this is almost comparable. I haven't got the measurement in front of me, but looking at the sort of size of the site and the number of dwellings on that site, but also just to talk about the number of units per site as we've got in the sites DPD by relation to their size and the various sites that Ms. Griffiths took us through. It is on a site-by-site basis. There's no magic formula, as it were, for number of units on a site. 30 is a starting point, but we respect the individual characteristics of each site, the constraints on the site. Certainly just the conversations that we had on SA21 Rogers Farm that we had last Friday, there were good reasons for pulling back some of the development on that site because of historic character issues that were in a previous appeal decision or previous refusal from memory, which were addressed by the consultant on that site's historic appraisal. So on each site, we've looked at the characteristics of the site and come to a professional view as to the appropriate density, taking into account constraints and nearby character of the local area.
And in terms of overlooking, I mean, sir, I understand that people will look at a planning application that's been put in. At this stage, we're not looking at a particular application, we're looking at an allocation. I haven't studied the details to look at the application, to look at whether even on that basis there would be an issue in terms of overlooking as against any standard the council has. But even if there were, that's simply one indicative layout, and certainly within the overall size of this site. So it would be astonishing if you couldn't provide back-to-back distances between properties, which were more than adequate to meet any normal standard for overlooking back gardens or even window to window distances. We don't see that there's any issue there, or at least none that's insurmountable.
So can I come in again?
Was Mr. Fairweather?
No, it's Terry Hyam.
Right, so I can't get your picture up at the moment. I do apologise. Mr. Hyam.
Yeah,
No, it's not. I'm not getting. I can hear you. That's the main thing.
well, I can see myself on the screen. On the
Can you
question of
see me?
overlooking, there are 12 houses opposite the site on the north side of Hamsland. Andrew Marsh has just referred to Challen as having a similar density, but in fact, Hamsland has a double character. On the north side, there are a lot of maisonettes, semi-detached houses, blocks of flats, and it has a much higher density than on the south side of Hamsland, which consists of about a dozen or so bungalows, plus a few detached houses, plus the church. Is a much looser linear development than the Challoner's one on the other side. So what we're talking about is putting a site to the south side of Hamsland, where the density is far, far lower than on the north side. And that we don't agree with. The other thing is we've got three representatives from Horsted Keynes here, all of whom have actually looked at the two trees that we referred to earlier, which Mr. Howes has said can just be removed. Well, they can't just be removed because they're not on the site. This is absolute certainty, nor are they on highways land, which is also a certainty. They are well inside the tarmacked path, the highland, which is highways land, and the wire dividing the site property from Mr. Fairweather's property is outside the line of these two trees. So it's simply not true to say that these trees have been sensitively dealt with. They haven't been dealt with at all, except by inaccurate drawings and maps.
Hopefully put in the non-technical summary I'm going to get, and then you will have a chance of commenting on that in the following week.
Thank you very much.
Because we're sort of going around a bit in circles here. I can understand your concern, but I've now got the points on this.
Can I address a separate point? So
I'm sorry?
Can I address a separate point?
What's your separate point?
Well, there are two other points. We made two issues in our submission relating to issue 1 matters. One related to feedback from Mid-Sussex, and the other related to a conflict of interest, because alongside site SA29 lies a potential development site for Mid-Sussex itself. And all three drawings which Rydens have so far produced have allowed the council, once access is got onto site SA29, to cross over the boundary, cutting down trees, which the council have told me in the past they're prepared to do, in order to get access to their own development site, which only very recently they have described precisely in those terms, a potential development site. So residents in Horsted Keynes and Hamsland in particular can see that this will benefit MSDC very considerably to be able to get access to their own site, which has been landlocked.
You have to stop you here because that's not part of the plan that's before me. And it's also questionable whether, in fact, that's a relevant point for me to consider. So whilst I've already read what you've said on this, so I'm already aware of the point, I don't see any merit now in extending the time of this examination to consider that. It's an interesting point you raised, but one which I can't really consider. I have to consider the plan that's before me, not one that might happen in the future. Was there one more point that you mentioned?
Yes, there was.
What's your final point?
Section 5 of our submission dealt with reasonable alternatives to SA29. And we believe reasonable alternatives, which are far less disruptive, are available. And I guess Helen or Dickens may wish to comment on this. but they exist on Jeffrey's Farm, of which he is a promoter. I'm not a promoter of Jeffrey's Farm. I've been associated with this process for the last 8 years, and I have always been a supporter of a site which can provide a reasonable contribution to Hamsland's needs, to Oyster Cane's housing needs, and I've made the case in our submission for that. So that was my other point.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to pursue that point now because I made it clear, and it's in my guidance note, that again, I have to consider what's in the plan. It's only if I don't think the plan is sound in its allocations, and that one possibility might be to bring in extra sites, I will go down that route. So I'm not ruling that out, but now is not the time to rule it in either. So I'm just going to ask if the council have got any further.
So may I a quick statement, if I may? Can I just say to clarify this, a site visit from yourself might be quite useful. It's an unusual site, and it could be well worth your while looking at it.
I have been there, but I will consider comments, and I'll see how much time I've got. So thank you for the invitation. That's helpful.
Thank you.
It looks like I've got Christopher Huff's hand up as well. If that's true, Mr. Huff, then do come in. That's true, Mr. Huff, right, do come in.
It is indeed true, sir, but I have a number of points really to come back on, but first of all, Mr. Brown dealt with a number of them for me, so the list was shorter, but I think basically, considering where we are now and that we need to get on, my technical notes to submit to you will be that bit longer, and I'll include the points that have recently been raised by Helena Griffiths and Paul Fairweather and Terry Hyam. So I'll put those in, and then they'll probably say again what they've said before. But at the end of the day, so this was a site that was identified originally because the AONB assessment found that it was of the lesser impact than other sites, and sites all around the village have been considered extensively, both in this exercise and the neighbourhood plan exercise, and this was selected as a site, and that's why Ryden came into it as being the one that was potentially the least harm to the AONB. But this is a rural settlement which needs some growth, some limited growth, and that's the ethos behind this site. But in terms of the technical details, I think to the extent that you are able to deal with them at this stage, they're better dealt with in the technical note. And ultimately, they will substantially rest on the difference between lay assertion and expert professional opinion. And ultimately, it will be a matter for the planning committee to decide whether this scheme fits the bill. But as far as you're concerned, there may be many other schemes, if this didn't, which could do. But we're confident with it. We think it's a very good scheme. It does address all the issues. Ryden have been very careful and sensitive in their response, and certainly taken everything into account and looked into it with all their experts. So I think probably that's where we leave it. Thank you, sir.
Does the council quickly want to come in with a final point on this, or shall we move on?
No, sir, I think we can move on. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, we're going to then look at site SA22, and we'll see how far we get with this one before we break. So there's land north of Burley Lane, Crawley Down, for 50 dwellings, one of the larger sites. I'm just going to scroll through to get my comments from people on this one. Right, the council referred to a promotional agreement that for a safe site, they say it's not yet secure access from Sycamore Lane. So obviously it'd be good to know what the outstanding issue there is. That there are no showstoppers according to the council and no living condition issues. Judith Ashton and Associates for Waste Development say it appears the site access is not secure at present, and therefore the site cannot be said to be deliverable. It's certainly in NPPF terms. Andrew Black Consulting for Vanderbilt Homes, that there's close proximity to a grade 2 building, Burley Cottage, and in fact illustrated with a plan on that. And then it's important to pay special attention to the southwest corner, but this is not shown in the master plan, which shows a southwest corner developed. So anything from the council to kick off on this one?
Thank you. So just 2 points, I think, if I can. When this site was originally promoted through the SADPD, there's been a slight shift since then in terms of who was leading the charge for the owner at that stage. Our understanding is that there's a new site promoter who came on board, we think, in around December, and that's, I think, has led to some of the observations that Mr. Black has made in terms of the latest illustrative master plan, which has been put forward, and how that compares with the council's position. So as far as the council is concerned, there is a previous heritage statement which does identify a need for sensitivity in the southwestern corner of the site near Burley Cottage. And so that has been taken on board entirely in the principles which underlie the allocation. There are plans which form part of that statement which indicate roughly the size of the area that one might be looking at as a buffer. And so I can't give you an exact figure, but if you look at the allocation on page 65, you'll see the curtilage of Burley Cottage. And in essence, so if you were to flip that over onto the allocation site, it would be something of the order of that. In overall terms, it's less than 1/8 of the overall site. And that's relevant concern about density, because if one took that away, you would still have 50 dwellings in roughly just under 2 hectares. So 25 dwellings per hectare, again, in overall density terms, perfectly achievable. And as I say, that is a factor which the council had in mind at the point when the allocation was drawn up. So that's the first thing. So the second thing in relation to the new promoter coming on board. Now, the council's not 100% privy to the details of this, but this relates to Judith Ashton's concern about the need to resolve issues of access. It's fair to say, sir, the council has been slightly disappointed with the speed with which that is or is not being resolved by the current promoter. We cannot see any good reason why it cannot be resolved in the plan period. However, at the moment, this site is down with an indicative phasing of years 1 to 5, and recognising the lack of progress at the moment and picking up on some of the concerns that Judith Ashton has raised. We now think, in the light of what's happened since the SADPD was prepared, it would be safer to push that back to years 6 to 10, so that it does not, and it won't, indeed I'm told it doesn't, form part of the council's current 5-year housing land supply. And so you'll have a paper on 5-year housing land supply, I'm hoping at some stage tomorrow, which I know people have been asking for, but you'll see that.
That's very helpful, thank you.
So I think so. In terms of the objection that's been made, we recognise that there is some force in Judith Ashton's point, but it's not one which we consider means that this site is not deliverable. It simply means that it would be prudent to assume that delivery will come in the back end of the plan period rather than at the front of it as previously. And so we can propose a modification to the policy to reflect that.
Right. Thank you for that. I notice I have Judith Ashton with her hand up. So do you want to come in now?
Thank you, Sir. Judith Ashton for Waits Developments. I'm grateful to the local authority for the clarification they have just provided. I would go just slightly further, Sir, and ask that, if possible, they provide you with a statement of common ground with the new promoters so that it is clear to you that this site is actually developable within the plan period, because we do have cause to consider there to be an issue that may not be resolvable in terms of the accessing situation. I hear what Mr. Brown is saying, but I just feel that in order to satisfy you, it would be helpful if that could be provided. Thank you.
What's the council's view on that?
So I mean, on that, I mean, from the council's perspective, we're happy to sign a statement of common ground. It takes two to tango. I don't know of any reason at the moment why the site promoter wouldn't. After all, it's in their own best interests to do it. We will certainly have that conversation with them on the basis that we would like to do it. I won't promise it because I don't know what they'll say, but hopefully we can and we will do.
That's honestly put. Councillor Ian Gibson, do come in.
Afternoon, sir.
Hello.
I don't think I introduced myself properly during last week's meeting, so maybe I should just clarify exactly what the word councillor there means. I'm a member of Worth Parish Council. I'm also a member of Turners Hill Parish Council. I'm the member for Crawley Down and Turners Hill Ward of Mid Sussex District Council, and recently I've also become the county councillor for Imberdown, which is Imberhorn and Crawley Down. It's one of these artificial constructs that people have difficulty.
You obviously have plenty of time then to do the gardening.
Indeed I do, sir. Indeed I do. But actually it combines everything within one single focus, and you have to say that the people therefore can look to me as actually covering all the things of interest, which I think we're about to go into. So I have 6 points.
Right.
Are you happy to take 6 points now?
Yeah, give them in now.
I will try to guide them through you, because I myself have found that point 1 to start with is probably a little bit nebulous, but let me just tell you what I'm trying to achieve through this. I am absolutely convinced that the DP6 figures represent targets for the individual 27 settlements of this district. And if those settlements delivered those DP6 targets, then you would have a complete delivery of the overall target for new housing through to 2031. And of course, the point that I'm going to make to you, which is in the papers which I submitted, is that the village of Crawley Down has already exceeded the DP6 target by some 67 houses at the last count, of which the construction of about 120 is in progress in the village at the present time. Now, various roles there. I'm also one of the main authors of the Crawley Down neighbourhood plan. And I want to go back to 2013 as the starting point for this, which was actually a briefing by Claire Tester that was given to Worth Parish Council, in which she outlined what the 2013 version of the district plan, which of course failed later on, what that was intended to achieve. And in particular, she highlighted that communities should get neighbourhood plans in place, that SIL would be used, and that therefore there would be riches for come under the control of the parish councils, and also that the council would advise numbers. I believe that Ms. Tester is actually on the call and could confirm those if you so wish. But since then, I've followed the path through the district plan, and indeed there's a document, MSD C8C, which explains how the DP6 figures were arrived at in terms of terms called policy on and policy off. And I should say that I'm not a planner. Those seem to me to be either you talk about strategic sites, or you don't talk about strategic sites. And clearly that affects the numbers that other communities have to have. The Crawley Down neighbourhood plan made faster progress, as many neighbourhood plans did, than the district plan. Indeed, it was made in 2016. In the absence of any figures that we had for the village at that time, we based it on policies, the policies that were intended to deliver the local housing need while leaving plenty of flexibility to address the objectively assessed need that might come into that. District plan was of course approved in March 2018. And in order to clarify the situation, I actually ventured into the district council, and before I became a councillor, and asked a question on the 31st of October 2018. And I've pulled it out of the minutes of that, which are in the public records. It's an easy date to remember. It is, of course, Halloween in 2018. And I'd like to read the reply, if I can, from Councillor McNaughton, who sadly passed away recently, who was then the cabinet member for housing and planning. He dresses me down to start with. He says, "Thank you for your question, Dr. Gibson, because this provides me with an opportunity to reiterate what officers have already explained to you. The district plan does in fact set out the housing requirement for individual settlements in policy DP6, settlement hierarchy. I can also confirm that the inspector in his report into the examination of the district plan acknowledged in paragraph 33 that this is a sound and helpful approach that has been evolved in consultation with parishes and neighbourhoods. You are confusing the role of the district plan with that of the Sheila. It is the role of the district plan to provide housing targets, which it does in DP6. Now, I think that there's a clarity there, which is that since then, we have understood that we had to address the DP6 figures and we would be done. Instead of that, we've gone roaring past it. Well, you might go a little way past it because of course, the quantums that come into you. But what's happened, and this is where I get to the point about the way in which we run into over delivery. So I'm crossing now into my second point. So the first point is that DP6 is a set of targets for the settlements. Now, in constructing the suite of sites that you have before you, that has been ignored. Because what's happened is that every time a settlement, and there's 14 settlements by my count, which was a little dated now, but 14 settlements which have crossed that target, the number was set to 0. And that effectively, those 14 settlements that I say in my evidence, I added up as having over-delivered 670 houses. And in particular, in category 2, then actually there has already been an over-delivery in category 2 if you sum up all the 6 of the communities which sit within category 2. And I am just questioning, how do I go back to my residents and explain that we have delivered and now we have to deliver more? I also, just in fairness, mentioned 4 other settlements which are in the same position, but that doesn't seem to have been followed up in any of the evidence. I seem to be the only person that seems to think that this is an important point in this district, and that's why I'm here today. Let me go on to point number 3, which I did touch on last week somewhat unsuccessfully, which is that the residual housing requirement is a volatile figure. Now, Mr. Black jumped in on me. He was very quick to challenge that, and I'm glad that he retracted the following day and actually had bothered to go to the 3-year housing delivery figures, as I have done, and understand exactly what the figure is. It was also, Mr. Brown went on to say that it's likely that we've had a good year this year. So we were sat at somewhere around about the mid-90s last year, 91% delivery across the past 3 years. I'm a sort of broad brush person, and if I would say that in broad terms, the number of affordable new houses which are built within the district is somewhere between 1/4 and 1/5 of the total, as a rule of thumb. The latest figures to Mid Sussex Cabinet on Monday showed that we had delivered 245 affordable homes, and that would imply that therefore the overall figure for the year 2021 is 1,000 new homes, which is very good, and I think that Mr. Brown was pointing in that direction. And that means that the 3-year delivery target, which I would suggest is one of the things that you want to keep an eye on, is going to be over 100% at the point where that is taken into account, which I think is around about this time next year when it actually becomes sort of an important issue in planning. And that takes me perhaps to my 4th point, which is that the residents would not like me to give up this opportunity without giving you some vision as to what the impact of adding 400 houses to 1,800 houses, as has happened in Crawley Down, in terms of this key issue of sustainability. The picture that they get is what are the implications for school places, what are the implications for doctors, what are the implications for traffic on the roads, particularly where rat runs start to occur, and indeed how to sustain the existing infrastructure. And I would hark back to the failure of the council to implement SIL as being the key issue in that back in 2013 when it got dropped. There's two aspects to that. Firstly, the amount of money which is spent in local communities is far too small. Taylor Wimpey are chipping in something like £1 million in S106 money. But the amount that trickles down to Worth Parish Council at the end of the day in order to spend in the village is 50,000. That isn't going to pay for the 3G artificial grass turf pitch that the 23 football teams that we now have in the village will actually benefit from. And in dropping SIL, it means that every time a small scale development has come forward, there has been no contribution into the additional impacts on the community. And in Crawley Down,
I'm going to stop you on this point because obviously, right. I mean, I know SIL is important and I've been a SIL examiner a lot of times, but unfortunately, that's not part of what I'm examining here. So whilst it's interesting and I'm interested in what you've written, I don't think there's any point in carrying on with that, I'm afraid. So let's have your point 5.
Yes, as I say, it was a sustainability issue. My point 5 is access, and you've already heard. I can't see that Mr. Matthews, who submitted he submitted some evidence on behalf of the Burley Woods Residents Association. But I have spoken to them recently, and the Burley Woods Residents Association believe that they are midway through the process of the freehold of the Burley Woods site. It's a site in which there's an overall freehold for the site and then freehold for the individual properties within it. But they are midway through the transfer from Miller Homes to them of the freehold of that site. They have told me it is currently with the land registry. They say that means that the Sycamore Lane access would not be acceptable to that community. Now, I think you need to clarify that with them, or somebody needs to clarify it. But the second point that I want to make is, from my point as a councillor, much more important. I have residents in Woodlands Close, members of this community who have lived together as a community for 50 years, receiving letters from a developer offering them significantly large sums of money over the value of their houses in order to purchase their property, knock it down and push away into the field. Now, I think that is outrageous. That is not sustainable development. It's nothing to do with environment. And it is outrageous that Mid Sussex have allowed this situation to occur. Point 6, local gaps, which I think is probably something that you've come across, but the DP13 says that local gaps brought forward in neighbourhood plans should be respected. The local gap between Crawley Down and Turners Hill is mentioned specifically in policy CDNP 08C. And the impact of this development on that gap is that the gap is currently 750 metres and the development I measured at 150 metres. So it's a 25% impact on that gap. Now, I put it to you that I would regard, 20%. I would regard 20%.
Figures again.
It's
so
700
current figure
is 750 metres from, right? Okay. And this is a country route. This isn't going out and up the road and back down again. It is, as the crow flies, along a path which you'd be welcome to walk, and I'd be happy to walk across it with you. And that is 750 metres, and the size of the development is about 150 as far as I can see, using a tool called Parish Online. That's 20%, and I ask you to consider, is that a significant impact such that it should be factored into whether or not this is a significant impact on the size of the gap at that point. And those were my 6 points.
Thank you. Right, is there anything else the council want to come back on this particular site?
Hang on, yes.
Brown.
So can I just check before I do, because I'm conscious of the fact that every time I come back on something, another 3 hands go up. I'm
I'm
quite
not aware
happy.
of any more hands, and you've got the last say on this one now, and then I'm going to move on to the last point. Or the
In
last
that case, I think
say
Mark might just come back on 1 or 2 points. So
right, so just come back.
Thanks, just in relation to the DP4 and DP6 numbers, it's clear that DP4 in the district plan is policy. It's in the, you'll see that the figures there are in the pink box, purple box, that forms the policy of DP4, and at DP6 talks about the settlement hierarchy, but the figures, the minimum residual figures, are outside of the policy. They are, in a sense, a supporting text. And we recognise in the text that those figures can change. In terms of how we've worked through this process, the methodology sets this out in the site selection paper 2 and then repeated in 3. That our approach has been to be as consistent with DP6 and DP4 as far as possible. The primary aim is to meet the DP4 numbers as in policy, but get as close as we can and consistent with those in DP6. And how the process has operated is that we've looked at all of the sites in each individual settlement. We've assessed whether the minimum residual in DP6, the guideline figure, can be met. And if not, we've then sought to look at sites in that same settlement category. And if at that point you still can't meet the settlement category need in DP4, you then move up to the more sustainable settlements. So that was something we discussed, I think, on the second day. And in this case, just to point you towards the fact that Crawley Down sits as a category 2 settlement, and we know that category 3 settlements are under-providing for all the reasons that we've heard on first couple of days, and also as we've been through site by site selection paper, ruling out sites in certain categories because they are, for instance, high impact on AONB and or other reasons. So therefore we have pushed any unmet need, if you'd like to call it that, at category 3 to category 2, and this is one of them. And the district plan preempts that on page 38, where it explains that some of the settlements they haven't got a 0, they've got a non-applicable next to them, in terms that we weren't looking at that stage for them to take any further growth. However, as it says on page 38, however, this does not preclude town and parish councils from identifying further sites in neighbourhood plans should they wish to do so to boost supply. Similarly, further sites may be allocated in the future to ensure that the minimum residual for each settlement category set out in DP4 housing is met based on monitoring. In other words, the figures at district plan stage were policy off until we looked at sites. We then looked at sites, assessed whether those figures could be met, and if not, it was met at the more sustainable categories higher up the hierarchy. And that's, Crawley Down category 2. That's exactly what's happened here.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the last site, which is SA32. So let's just find that site. Right, Widdy Pitts Farm, Selsfield Road, Turner's Hill. So SA32, just bear with me a minute. The council's position is full planning permission expected by the end of this year. Dwellings completed by 22-23. Safe and secure access can be provided. No significant infrastructure considerations. It's within the high wheeled AONB and the policy requires an LVIA. And that Turner's Hill is a category 3 settlement offering some key services. Bus stop 200 metres away, buses to Crawley, Haywards Heath and East Grinstead. The policy requires any contamination investigation and remedial works required. Turley for A2 Dominion. Remind me, it's within a building stone brackets Cookfield mineral safeguarding area. And Andrew Black, that it's within the AONB. So again, any introductory comments from the council?
So I think the only thing I would say is, I mean, this is, if I say it's a typical Andrew Black objection, I don't mean that critically, but the points he's raised here in relation to Willie Pits are exactly the same as he's raised in relation to other sites which are either AONB or mineral safeguarding area. Our answer to them is exactly the same. The objection to AONB is a generic one. Should we even be looking in the AONB? You know, our answer to that is yes, because that's what the district plan tells us. And as far as the mineral safeguarding area is concerned, so the answer in this case is the one that we've given you previously. It's a relatively small site. It's beneath the thresholds required for consultation with the county council. The county council has not objected. It's in relatively close proximity to other properties. And on its own, we don't consider it's likely to be a viable or a matter of concern to the county. Thank you, sir.
Okay, anybody wishes to speak on this site? Anybody else, that is? Mr. Black, did you want to come back? No.
No, just to say, yeah, Mr. Brown's right. It is a consistent approach. We just didn't want you to think, sir, that any silence from us was an endorsement of development of this site. So
I never expect silence from you, Mr. Black, on any site.
Grateful, sir.
Councillor Ian Gibson, you're welcome to come in again.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of points on this. Clearly, it's in the AONB. If you've visited the site, then you'll be aware that there's a significant issue with a footpath access to this site, to the services in the village, the school, the shops, and indeed the pub. And it is difficult to see how those can be resolved in a way, given the nature of traffic and the position of the development on the hillside. I'd also like to refer to the submission by Turner's Hill Parish Council, which draws to your attention the fact that a development of 44 homes has just been completed within the village, and this is a relatively smaller community. The neighbourhood plan offers a further development of, the first one is 47, just on being completed. The next development is 44. The parish council also embraced the possibility of the development in whole or in part of site 852, which is follows on from the 44 and is on the non-AONB side of the village. So the parish council is rather surprised that it was decided to take forward a site within the AONB rather than one which was outside the AONB. The 852 is for 130 homes, but obviously it could be brought forward in smaller units. Thank you.
That's an interesting point that you raised there, and I wonder if the council can come back as to why the AONB site was selected as priority.
That page that'll tell you where to go to find it, and I'm talking to fill the gap until he gets there.
I'm now there. I believe what Councillor Gibson's saying is the parish council will prefer the site 852, which is land north of Old Vicarage Field, Lion Lane, Turner's Hill. That one we've assessed in site selection paper 3. There are a few issues with it, which were the reasons why we rejected that, and that is listed building gets a pink, less than substantial harm high, conservation area, impact on conservation area, less than substantial harm in brackets high. ancient woodland adjacent, mature trees and TPO trees adjacent, and local road access gets a severe. The conclusion there is not considered possible to provide a suitable access in this location, and further text there. And if you refer back to our methodology, anything, I think if you saw a red on a local road access, then it fails methodology. So we did not consider that as a reasonable, not deliverable, not a reasonable alternative. By comparison, we believe this site contributes towards the remaining residual requirement of category 3, where Turner's Hill sits, and also looking at the, as we said, the policy off situation in the supporting text of DP6.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to close in a few minutes. I suggest before I do that we've had talk about site visits, and what I need people to do is to contact the programme officer, to contact Charlotte Glancy with suggestions to see what kind of programme we can put together. I think that's my only suggestion at this stage. Charlotte, is there anything else I need to say?
No, that's fine. I've had a couple of requests already this afternoon, and I've noted it in my little spreadsheet that I've done so far. So if we discuss it later, then I'll send it to the council to confirm they're happy with it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for taking part in a long session with good humour. Thank you for that. And 5 minutes to 4, and we're now closed for the afternoon. So everybody log out. Thank you.